I am continuing in my reading. What I'm doing in this series is to read through the entire standard works of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This consists of the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price. I am continuing reading in a chronological order, according to event, not according to publication or volume, so I'm skipping around a bit as I move along. We are continuing with our reading of the Doctrine and Covenants. We are still in section 107. I have now read the first 57 verses of this section in two separate videos. The first video dealt primarily with the presiding authorities of the church, being the First Presidency, Quorum of the 12, and the First Quorum of 70, and how their authority is delineated. We also got a description of the difference between the Melchizedek and the Aaronic priesthood. In our second video, we read about the patriarchal priesthood, the priesthood that passes from father to son through the chosen line, what the Bible calls the birthright. And very fascinating, very wonderful, very beautiful revelations there. The rest of section 107, which we'll be reading in this video, it says it was given at sundry times, some of it as early as 1831, which would be, 4 years earlier. So it's November of 1831, so about 3.5 years earlier. But as this is the part that deals with the presidencies of the various quorums, I can't verify that there weren't presidencies and quorums officially organized before this time. But it is being stated here, at least restated here at this time, because the 12 apostles are going out to organize the priesthood. And that's what their main responsibility is at this time. Is they're organizing the priesthood in the various branches. And I do believe that there may have been quorums like in Kirtland, in the centers of the church, Kirtland, maybe Zion. I have not found evidence of it yet, but what they're doing on this mission is to go out and organize the priesthood into quorums, to get them truly organized. Up to this point, you have in this branch, you have 10 elders, 4 or 5 priests, a couple of deacons and teachers, but they're not organized, they're just ordained to the offices. So that's what I think we're getting at this point. We now read, we're going to finish out section 107, starting in 58. It is the duty of the 12 also to ordain and set in order all the other officers of the church, agreeable to the revelation which says, to the church of Christ in the land of Zion, in addition to the church laws respecting church business. Verily I say unto you, saith the Lord of hosts, there must needs be presiding elders to preside over those who are of the office of an elder, also priests to preside over those who are of the office of priest, and also teachers to preside over those who are of the office of the teacher, in like manner, and also the deacons. Wherefore, from deacon to teacher, and from teacher to priest, and from priest to elder, severally as they are appointed, according to the covenants and commandments of the church. Then comes the high priesthood, which is the greatest of all. Wherefore it must needs be that one be appointed of the high priesthood to preside over the priesthood, and he shall be called president of the high priesthood of the church, or in other words, the presiding high priest over the high priesthood of the church. From the same comes the administering of ordinances and blessings upon the church by the laying on of the hands. Wherefore the office of a bishop is not equal unto it, for the office of a bishop is in administering all temporal things. Nevertheless a bishop must be chosen from the high priesthood, unless he is a literal descendant of Aaron. For unless he is a literal descendant of Aaron, he cannot hold the keys of that priesthood. Nevertheless a high priest that is after the order of Melchizedek may be set apart unto the ministering of temporal things, having a knowledge of them by the Spirit of truth, and also to be a judge in Israel, to do the business of the church, to sit in judgment upon transgressors, upon testimony as it shall be laid before him, according to the laws, by the assistance of his counselors, whom he has chosen or will choose among the elders of the church. So note here that it states in verse 58, agreeable to the revelation which says, in other words, this is reiterating a previous revelation. This is saying, I've already told you that this is how it's going to be organized. Now it's time to do the organization. That's what he's saying. So while this seems to verify that while the revelation was given on how to organize the various quorums, they had not yet done it because the initial organization required the authority of the 12 apostles. And so they were kind of a loose group of priesthood holders that had various offices, but were not organized into quorums until after the 12 apostles were organized and ordained because it is their authority that is required to organize the rest of it. Now, you'll note that there are quorums of deacons, teachers, priests, and elders, but there are no quorums of high priests. And when it mentions the high priesthood here, and appointing a president of the high priesthood, this is talking about the stake president. This isn't talking about the first presidency. We already talked about that earlier in the section. This is now talking about the stake presidency. And we can tell this because it talks about the president of the high priesthood, which is greater than a bishop, but a bishop is taken from those who hold the high priesthood. So we are again having this delineation of what the priesthood is. We have the two main branches of the priesthood, Melchizedek and Aaronic, but you'll remember in the beginning we also said that the Aaronic contains the Levitical priesthood. So the Aaronic priesthood is the priesthood of the bishopric, holding the keys of presidency over the lesser priesthood. The other offices, teacher and deacon, are the Levitical priesthood. They are, again, lesser than the bishopric, lesser than the priests, because they have a lesser degree of priesthood, which is contained within the Aaronic. The high priests are the high priesthood. This is to say that they are the ones that have all the priesthood. Elders are a lesser or appendage to the high priesthood. They are still the Melchizedek priesthood, but they are not the high priesthood. And so we have the Levitical, which is the lesser portion of the Aaronic priesthood, and now we have the Melchizedek priesthood, in which we have a higher and lower priesthood. And that is what we have here. The stake president is the president over the high priesthood. In other words, he is the leader of the high priests, which contain all lesser offices. And so he is the president of all lesser offices in the church, or at least in his stake. Now note again, we have this reiteration or restatement that the Aaronic priesthood, the bishopric, is held by a literal descendant of Aaron. They have the legal right to it. And the only reason that high priests are given this position is because the high priesthood contains within it all lesser offices. And so they can operate in the office of a bishop without being a literal descendant of Aaron. But now we get into the specifics of these different offices. So let us pick it up in verse 73. This is the duty of a bishop who is not a literal descendant of Aaron, but has been ordained to the high priesthood after the order of Melchizedek. Thus shall he be a judge, even a common judge among the inhabitants of Zion, or in a stake of Zion, or in any branch of the church, where he shall be set apart unto this ministry, until the borders of Zion are enlarged, and it becomes necessary to have other bishops or judges in Zion or elsewhere. And inasmuch as there are other bishops appointed, they shall act in the same office. But a literal descendant of Aaron has a legal right to the presidency of this priesthood, to the keys of this ministry, to act in the office of bishop independently, without counselors, except in a case where a president of the high priesthood after the order of Melchizedek is tried to sit as a judge in Israel. And the decision of either of these councils, agreeable to the commandment which says, And again, verily I say unto you, the most important business of the church, and the most difficult cases of the church, inasmuch as there is not satisfaction upon the decision of the bishop or judges, it shall be handed over and carried up unto the council of the church, before the presidency of the high priesthood. And the presidency of the council of the high priesthood shall have power to call other high priests, even 12, to assist as counselors. And thus the presidency of the high priesthood and its counselors shall have power to decide upon testimony according to the laws of the church. And after this decision it shall be had in remembrance no more before the Lord. For this is the highest council of the church of God, and a final decision upon controversy in spiritual matters. There is not any person belonging to the church who is exempt from this council of the church. And inasmuch as a president of the high priesthood shall transgress, he shall be had in remembrance before the common council of the church, who shall be assisted by 12 counselors of the high priesthood, and their decision upon his head shall be an end of controversy concerning him. Thus none shall be exempted from the justice of the laws of God, that all things may be done in order and in solemnity before him, according to truth and righteousness. Now this can get a little confusing because the same terminology is used for stake organization as is used for the general church organization. So what we have here, you can have a bishop's council or the high council of the stake renders a decision, and that decision is final, but except it can be appealed to the 12 apostles. In which case the 12 apostles and the first presidency would hear the case, but their ruling is final. There is no appeal from that. That is the final decision of the church because they are the general authorities. So it's kind of confusing because it refers to a president of the high priesthood as both a stake president and as the first presidency. And then it refers to the high council, sometimes referring to the local stake high councils, or sometimes referring to the quorum of the 12 apostles. The other thing to note here is the bishop, as a descendant of Aaron, if it is a descendant of Aaron, they have the authority to act without counselors. Like in the Old Testament, you have the high priest. And that would be the high priest of the Aaronic priesthood. He is the final authority of the Aaronic priesthood. And if a descendant of Aaron, he doesn't need counselors because he has the legal right of that presidency. If he's not a direct descendant of Aaron, he has to act with counselors. That's what we have today. We have the presiding bishop, and he has his 2 counselors. Now, the presiding bishop is a general authority. He is the president of the Aaronic priesthood in the world, not just in a local branch or ward or stake. He is the president of the Aaronic priesthood in the world over all the church. He is a general authority. If there is going to be a trial of any member of the 12 apostles or the first presidency, it will be heard by a bishop's council of the presiding bishop. That's what we had when Sylvester Smith brought Joseph Smith up on charges. It was a bishop's council because only the bishop has the authority to sit in judgment on the president of the church. Now, the presiding bishop has to sit in judgment on the first presidency. The local bishop, the local stake presidents, also, I believe, I could be wrong, but I do believe that they also would have to be brought up on a bishop's court or a bishop's council of the presiding bishop. It couldn't be a local bishop. It would have to be the presiding bishop because that is his position. Now, it's all very confusing. I have heard it said that being a literal descendant of Aaron claiming the bishopric only applies to the presiding bishop, and all local bishops still have to be high priests. I'm not sure. I'd have to look more into that. From the way it is laid out in the Doctrine and Covenants, it is not completely clear, and it seems to me that all bishops, whether they're local or whether they're the presiding, could be claimed by a descendant of Aaron. Just like in the Old Testament, you had the high priest, would have been their presiding bishop, but you had many other priests. All priests in the Old Testament were descendants of Aaron. They were like local bishops. All the priests were. And that's kind of what I think the Doctrine and Covenants is kind of talking about. But as I said, I've actually heard it said that Joseph Smith stated that it only applied to the presiding bishop. It's just, I'm not sure. But we're going to now finish this out, picking it up in verse 85. And again, verily I say unto you, the duty of a president over the office of a deacon is to preside over 12 deacons, to sit in council with them, and to teach them their duty, edifying one another as it is given according to the covenants. And also the duty of the president over the office of the teachers is to preside over 24 of the teachers, and to sit in council with them, teaching them the duties of their office as given in the covenants. Also the duty of the president over the priesthood of Aaron is to preside over 48 priests, and sit in council with them, to teach them the duties of their office as is given in the covenants. This president is to be a bishop, for this is one of the duties of this priesthood. And again, the duty of the president over the office of elders is to preside over 96 elders, and to sit in council with them, and to teach them according to the covenants. This presidency is a distinct one from that of the 70, and is designed for those. This presidency is a distinct one from that of the 70, and is designed for those who do not travel into all the world. And again, the duty of the president of the office of the high priesthood is to preside over the whole church, and to be like unto Moses. Behold, here is wisdom. Yea, to be a seer, a revelator, a translator, and a prophet, having all the gifts of God which he bestows upon the head of the church. And it is according to the vision showing the order of the 70, that they should have 7 presidents to preside over them, chosen out of the number of the 70. And the 7th president of these presidents is to preside over the 6. And these 7 presidents are to choose other 70 besides the first 70, to whom they belong, and are to preside over them. and also other 70, until 7 times 70, if the labor in the vineyard of necessity requires it. And these 70 are to be traveling ministers unto the Gentiles first, and also unto the Jews. Whereas other officers of the church, who belong not unto the 12, neither to the 70, are not under the responsibility to travel among all nations, but are to travel as their circumstances shall allow. Notwithstanding, they may hold as high and responsible offices in the church. Therefore, now let every man learn his duty, and to act in the office in which he is appointed in all diligence. He that is slothful shall not be counted worthy to stand, and he that learns not his duty and shows himself not approved shall not be counted worthy to stand. Even so, amen. Now, I do note first, deacons preside over 12, teachers 24, priests 48, and elders 96. Now, I think the different sizes of the quorums are because of the difference in the responsibilities and duties of each quorum. But you'll also note here, the 12 and the 70 are to travel throughout the world. They are to open the missions. They are to declare the gospel to the Gentiles and then the Jews. The other officers of the priesthood are not required to be traveling throughout the world, meaning their calling in the church is to build up the church where they live. Now, they still serve missions. They still go out when circumstances permit, but that is not their primary duty. On the other hand, the 70 and the 12, their primary duty is to travel, is to go out to the world. They are not to be in one place. They are not to build up the kingdom in their local home war. They're supposed to be traveling throughout the world, building up the kingdom, opening new places, organizing the church. Note also the organization of the 70. Very interesting that all the rest of them, you have a president over a quorum, and usually 2 counselors. But with the 70, you have 7 presidents. They aren't counselors. They're 7 presidents, with the 7th being over the 6th. So you have 1 main president, then you have 6 other presidents, then you have the 70. This lets you divide the 70 into multiple groups. So you have the 7 presidents, each one would be over 10 members of the quorum. And each of those 10 could then divide into partnerships of 2, making it easier to divide up the duties and the traveling. The other quorums don't have this. You have 96 elders in a quorum. Yeah, sure, they can be divided into pairs of 2, but if you divide them into groups of 12, you don't have 12 presidents over them. You still only have 1 president. He may have assistants, but they're not the same. See, a president has keys over his quorum. So the president of a deacon's quorum has the keys to preside over his quorum. He has his counselors. The counselors don't have keys, only the president does. The president of the teacher's quorum holds the keys. The president of the bishop, the bishop is the president over the priest's quorum, and he holds the keys. The president of the elders' quorum holds keys. The presidents of the 70, all 7 of them are presidents, and therefore all 7 of them hold keys. It's a very interesting organization. But this is, again, getting much longer than I wanted, so we're going to leave it here, and in our next reading will be section 108 and 137. 108, then 137. That will be next, and I will see you there.